Hi, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm Kat, and today I have for you a true crime case. And I just need to give you a trigger warning. This case involves child abuse resulting in the child's death. So if this is something which triggers you, by all means, you can leave the video now, and I'll see you in my next one. Elsie didn't have the best start in life, but it soon seemed that her life will change for the better when Matthew and his husband Craig decided to adopt her. They were a couple madly in love with each other and desperately wanted children to complete their family. So they went down the route of adoption. They were looking for a baby so they can witness all the milestones, the first steps, the first words, and what their child would become growing up. It seemed like the perfect match. Elsie was looking for a loving home, and Matthew and Craig had love and a home to offer. To the outside world, Matthew was a proud and loving dad. But behind closed doors, something sinister would be happening. 2 999 calls in the space of 6 months, and the second cost Elsie her life. Now let's get into everything that happened. Elsie was born as Shayla O'Brien on 17th of November 2014, 1 week after her due date. She was born a healthy baby and she had an average weight and size. Just days after being born, she was taken into care by the mayor of Glamorgan Council because her mother had used drugs throughout her pregnancy. There were initial concerns that Elsie may have contracted hepatitis C from her birth mother, which meant that she had to undergo months of testing, but she was eventually found to be infection-free. Her father was never identified. Her maternal grandmother, Shan O'Brien, accepted that at the time of giving birth, her daughter was living a chaotic lifestyle and couldn't care for the baby, but Shan had wanted to look after the baby and give her a loving home, but she was deemed as not suitable. The family continued to have contact with Elsie whilst she was in the care of the foster family, and in January 2015, Shan started proceedings in the family court to become her legal guardian. The grandmother wanted to bring Elsie up in a happy, healthy and warm family environment, but social services and the family court decided she would not be able to cope. Despite this decision and Elsie being in foster care, as a family they were still able to have weekly contact with Elsie and they saw her at every opportunity. Then, in August 2015, out of nowhere, they were told by social services they had to go and see Elsie as soon as possible and say goodbye for the final time, as a suitable adoptive family had been found for her. This was completely devastating for Shan and the whole family. Elsie was a happy, healthy little girl, always with a smile on her face. She loved to get attention and she liked interacting with people and other children. Matthew Hicks was born in Cornwall, where he lived with his parents and his older sister until he turned 16 years old. The Hicks family were described as the kind of people who created a community. Matthew was born into and grew up in a loving family. He attended the local school near the village of Delabole and left with 10 GCSEs. He then went on to college, but he soon left and decided to get a job instead. Matthew was helpful and loving to friends and family. He was extremely dedicated to his family. He was a loyal friend and he was also honest. Matthew worked in a restaurant for a while before he moved to Swindon, Wiltshire in December 2002. The next year, in 2003, he got a job at the town's Oasis Leisure Centre, where he worked his way up from assistant to poolside lifeguard and finally to operations manager. He left the leisure center in 2011. In 2006, he met Craig Scully, who was 5 years older than him while living in Swindon. Craig had a nightclub there at the time. They began a relationship in 2008, and 2 years later, in late 2010, they moved to Cardiff, where Craig had a large family. After selling their house in Swindon in 2009, the couple lived in a caravan for 4 months in Oxford, staying with friends when it became too cold in the winter. They then purchased a 3-bedroom property in Wellwright Road in Fairwater, Cardiff, for about £150,000 in September 2010. Matthew remained living with a friend until finishing his job at the leisure center, moving full-time to live with Craig in February 2011. Matthew worked a number of jobs. He was a customer service advisor for British Gas, then a sales negotiator for estate agents Peter Allen, and then for services company Working Links. He also taught fitness classes at a gym part-time. Very soon the couple started making wedding plans and they eventually got married in Portugal in 2012. Early on in their relationship they talked about having children. They both sat down and talked about their life goals, what they wanted for the future, and they both agreed they wanted to have children. They didn't mind whether it would be a girl or a boy, but they decided they wanted a child as young as possible so they can witness as much as they could, from the first step to the first word and beyond. After their marriage, they had already decided they would like to have children through adoption. It was decided that Matthew, nicknamed by Craig Safety Boy, would give up his full-time work for them to have a child, so he could look after the child whilst Craig would work to handle the finances. Matthew had experience of children through family members and he was involved in the creche when he worked at the Oasis Leisure Centre in Swindon. Vivian Cowney, a colleague of Matthew's from Working Links from 2012, continued to see Matthew as he was an instructor at the gym she went to. She was not surprised Matthew decided to adopt, as he himself experienced a loving home. Elsie's elder sibling, C, was placed with the couple as a baby, and Matthew Scully-Hicks gave up full-time work to become primary carer, with Craig Scully-Hicks playing a significant role as well. Craig's job required him to work away from home for 2 to 3 nights per week in Leicester, I believe, and he was never present when Elsie suffered injuries. The couple applied to become adopters. Craig hoped to adopt a daddy's little princess, so in September 2015 they welcomed 18-month-old Elsie in the family, which already had another adoptive child. C, we only know C by the initial, had been placed with the couple as a baby. She was already settled into the home, well settled into a routine and well loved. 6 months later, the new family moved to a £400,000 four-bedroom property in the upmarket part of Cardiff, suburb of Llandaff. They looked the very model of a modern, happy family. Matthew and Craig Scully-Hicks and their lively daughter Elsie, an infant given the chance of a new life through adoption. Neighbors, friends and colleagues spoke warmly of them. Craig went to work while Matthew looked after their princess. Elsie was great, apart from around meal times and bedtime. She was physically tiny and delicate, but had a brash and bouncy personality. A health visitor described her as a very happy, smiley child and said she was loving life. She was lovely, smiles all round. Vivian saw Matthew as a very proud father, a caring and loving father who would do anything for his child. When she would see him with his daughter, he was calm and caring. She never saw him angry and she was quite impressed with his patience. He would discipline Elsie by giving her time out. Craig said that his husband was a devoted and loving father, with the couple taking decisions about Elsie's care together. His house was filled with love and happiness all the time. Matthew and Craig had completed the rigorous adoption process without a problem and without any concerns being raised. They looked like they could give Elsie the new start that she needed. The couple received regular visits from staff during the adoption process. Health visitors would later call, as they do with any new family, and medical staff would see Elsie at hospital. Matthew and Craig formally adopted Elsie on May 12, 2016. Now, it sounds all perfect, pink, rainbows and unicorns, right? But there was something sinister and sad going on. Unable to cope with the demands of parenthood, 32-year-old Matthew Scully-Hicks was physically abusing Elsie under the noses of professionals, family, friends, even his own husband. The painful reality is that the abuse of little Elsie was hidden in plain sight. By the time Elsie arrived in their home, Matthew had already established a routine with Elsie's adoptive sibling. Matthew expected Elsie to fit into that same routine. Text messages in September and October 2015 indicated that during that period Elsie's sleeping was an issue, as was her crying. In those text messages, Matthew referred to mealtimes and bedtimes as his worst nightmare. Elsie would be crying and screaming. In more than one text message, Matthew described Elsie as having a diva strop. He referred to her in strong and derogatory language. These texts were at the start of Elsie's placement in their home, capturing a difficult period as Matthew and Craig were trying to adjust to the arrival of a young child with her own character and personality. Matthew became quite frustrated at what he said to be Elsie's attitude, her crying and her tantrums. To the outside world and those who saw him regularly, be it healthcare professionals, social workers, or friends and family, Matthew looked like a loving and caring father. But Matthew struggled when he was alone with Elsie or with her and her adoptive sibling. Although he denied not being able to cope with two children, text messages show otherwise. On 5th of November 2015, according to Matthew, Elsie accidentally fell when she was at an activity table in the kitchen. Only Elsie and Matthew were in the house at the time. As a result of that fall, it is now known that Elsie sustained fractures of the tibia and femur of her right leg. Matthew told his husband Craig and the doctors who saw Elsie that it was an accidental fall. Within days, Elsie couldn't bear her weight on her right leg. After conversations with Craig and his family, Matthew took Elsie to her GP, who then referred her to the orthopedic trauma clinic at the University Hospital of Wales. Elsie's pelvis and legs were x-rayed. The doctor who viewed the x-rays identified only one fracture, that of the tibia. He missed the second fracture. If the doctor wouldn't miss the second fracture, hospital protocol would have required him to show the x-ray to a consultant. Dr. Nia John, a consultant community pediatrician at the Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, who has a safeguarding children role, said that if the existence of both fractures would have been detected, the management would have been different. A child protection medical would have been carried out. Dr. Nia would have sought further professional advice. Unfortunately, the opportunity was missed. The fall that Matthew described couldn't have resulted in two separate fractures, each with its own mechanism, in a child of Elsie's age. Those two fractures were not the result of an accidental fall as described by Matthew. These injuries were inflicted. They were caused by Matthew's frustration with and anger towards Elsie, whose crying and behavior didn't really fit with the routine he had already established. In December 2015, it was the first time that Matthew's next-door neighbor first heard a baby crying. The neighbor would hear Matthew saying "shut up," which he repeated quite a few times, sometimes using swear words when telling the baby to shut up. The neighbor got the impression that Matthew was angry and frustrated because the child was crying. The crying continued up until they moved from the house in Wellwright Road in April 2016. Another neighbor in the same house described Matthew's voice as sounding like a controlled tantrum. It was associated with the baby crying. Between February and April 2016, the other neighbor heard the baby crying and the person, who was Matthew, saying "shut up, you little effing brat." The next time the neighbor heard the baby crying, he heard Matthew say "shut up, you silly little cunt." Another neighbor heard him shouting in a similar manner. This showed that Matthew was frustrated and angry at Elsie for crying, and he couldn't handle the crying. Within 10 days of moving into the new house, Elsie appeared to have developed the beginnings of a squint in her left eye, which could also be attributed to in non-accidental trauma in a baby. Matthew was concerned about this, and Elsie was taken to the doctor, who saw the toddler to be a normal, happy child. On 16th of December 2015, Elsie had a large bruise on her forehead. Another bruise in the same spot was noticed in January 2016, and the fall down the stairs on 10th of March 2016 resulted in bruise-type injuries to Elsie. It was only after the fall in March that Matthew decided to seek medical treatment. He told professionals that the bruise in December happened when Elsie was at her play kitchen. She pulled herself up to a standing position using the handles. The door opened as the magnet in the door gave way. Elsie lost her balance and hit her head on the worktop of the play kitchen. But the doors of that play kitchen open with the tiniest pressure, and if Elsie would have pulled herself up using one handle, the door would have opened outwards towards Elsie. Elsie wouldn't have fallen forwards as the door opened. She would have fallen backwards, and she would not have struck her head on the worktop of the kitchen. When the health visitor saw Matthew and Elsie after the bruising to her forehead, he told her that he sought medical treatment for Elsie, but no medical treatment was obtained for Elsie in respect of the bruise. The bruise which Elsie sustained on 16th of December 2015 was caused by Matthew. It was not an accident. The injury happened at the same time as an adoption review, and Elsie was seen by her social worker, an adoption social worker, and an independent reviewing officer, but the presence of the bruise was not recorded. This bruise was visible for 8 weeks, yet it hasn't been recorded, and the adoption board was not notified of it. All in all, Elsie was seen 15 times by social workers. By January 18, Elsie had another bruise on her face, which again went unchecked by medics. As for the fall down the stairs on 10th of March 2016, Matthew said that Elsie was pulling herself up on the top stair gate, which had a faulty catch. The gate opened and Elsie fell down the stairs. Matthew's husband Craig did say there was a problem with this gate. The catch didn't easily fit. Matthew did call for help on this occasion. He rang 999 and said that his daughter had fallen down the stairs at their home. He told the call handler that she had vomited a number of times and was unresponsive.
Elsie.
And what caused the fall?
I didn't push the gate closed properly and she fell down.
Okay, is there any serious bleeding?
Not that I can see.
Okay, and you say she's not fully alert?
No.
Okay, what part of the body's injured?
I don't know. She's just lying there. She's just all floppy.
Elsie was rushed to hospital. At the hospital, the doctor who saw and treated Elsie accepted Matthew's account of the fall as being consistent with the injuries found. She was discharged after 4 hours of observation. On each of these occasions, Matthew had been alone with Elsie in the house. Matthew already knew that in November and December, his frustration and anger towards Elsie resulted in injuries to her. He didn't tell anyone the truth of what happened or the reason for it. Regular visits were made by social workers and the health visitor. To no one, not even his husband, he mentioned nothing of him struggling to cope with 2 children. To his husband Craig and the professionals, Matthew continued to look like a concerned, caring and loving father. 2 weeks after being formally adopted, Elsie was dead at the hands of Matthew Scully-Hicks, after his frustration at her inability to fit into his idealized vision of fatherhood turned into violence. In text messages to his husband, who was spending much of his time working away from home, Matthew described Elsie as Satan dressed up in a baby grow, a psycho and the exorcist. On 25th of May 2016, Elsie was healthy and well. Most of the day she appeared to be having fun. She visited a toddler gym class, gym tots with Matthew in the morning. She played on swings at a local park and accompanied her father shopping. He was going to buy Elsie clothes to wear at a party to celebrate her adoption. He sent pictures of outfits at Marks and Spencer to his husband and bought one for her to wear. She had been involved in activities with him, her adoptive sibling, and his niece as well. Matthew's niece left at 5:20 p.m. Dinner that day took longer than normal according to Matthew. It didn't end until 5:45 p.m. After finishing her dinner, Elsie walked hand in hand with Matthew into the lounge and had her nappy change. However, Matthew said he noticed that something was wrong with Elsie. He said he had changed Elsie for bed in the lounge and then went into the kitchen. As he went back into the room, Elsie was in a similar position on the floor as he had left her. He thought that she was asleep or maybe watching telly. As he got closer, Elsie didn't acknowledge him going into the room, which was quite strange for her. He got closer and called her name, but there was no response. He got even closer and gave her a gentle tap, but there was no response at all. Elsie's adoptive sibling had been with Elsie in the front room following their dinner. Her sibling was there when Matthew rang the emergency services when he gave Elsie CPR, and she was also there when the emergency services arrived and started treating Elsie. Even though the adoptive sibling didn't see the assault on Elsie, the sibling witnessed the immediate aftermath. The phone call to emergency services came shortly after the meal and before Elsie's bedtime at 7 p.m. This would have been the times when Elsie potentially would cry and demonstrate what Matthew described as attitude. It was Elsie's behavior, Matthew's frustration with it, which turned to anger, which led him to inflict serious injuries, which quickly led to Elsie's collapse.
Emergency service?
Ambulance.
Ambulance, thank you.
Welsh Ambulance Service. Please hold.
Come on.
Hold the line, please. We're held in a queue waiting for ambulance.
Okay.
Welsh Ambulance Service. Please hold.
We are very busy. I'll get you through as quick as I can.
Okay.
Still trying to get you through.
Welsh Ambulance Service.
Seriously, you need to hurry up. My daughter's not breathing.
Craig, I've got a critical call. Welsh Ambulance Service, South East. Okay, no, on another line for you. Hold on.
Welsh Ambulance Service. Please hold.
What are you doing, baby?
Ambulance service, what's the full address of the emergency? Please repeat the full address to confirm. Please now confirm the telephone number you're calling from. Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
I was just changing my daughter for bed, and then she went all floppy and limp, and now she's not doing anything. She's lying on the floor.
Okay, you with her now, sir?
I am.
How old's your daughter?
She's 18 months.
Okay, is she awake?
No.
Is she breathing?
No.
Okay, are you right by her now?
Yep, I'm trying to do CPR.
Okay, listen carefully now. I'm organising the help for you now. If you stay on the line and I'll tell you exactly what to do next, okay?
Okay.
So listen carefully, lay her flat on her back on the floor and remove any pillows.
Yeah.
Now kneel next to her and look in the mouth for any food or vomit. Is there anything in her mouth?
No, it's okay.
Okay, now place your hand on her forehead, your other hand under her neck, then carefully tilt the head back.
Yep.
And put your ear next to her mouth. Can you feel or hear any breathing?
She's just took a breath in, but she's not breathing out.
Right, look at her very closely. I want you to say now, every
She's just
single
breathed
time she takes a breath in, starting immediately. First breath.
No breath.
Nothing?
No.
Okay. Listen carefully, okay? I'm going to tell you how to give mouth to mouth. With her head carefully tilted back, pinch her nose closed and completely cover her mouth with your mouth. Then blow 2 regular breaths into the lungs, about 1 second each, just enough to make the chest rise with each breath. All right, so do those 2 breaths for me now.
Yep.
All right, tell me when you're done.
Done.
Did you feel the air going in and out?
Yeah, I saw the chest go up.
Okay, listen carefully and I'll tell you how to do resuscitation. Make sure she is flat on her back on the floor.
Yep.
All right, place the heel of your hand on the breastbone in the center of the chest, right between the nipples.
Yep.
Push down about 2 inches with only the heel of one hand touching the chest. Pump the chest hard and fast 30 times, at least twice per second, and let the chest come all the way up between pumps. Tell me when you're done.
Yep.
Okay, at this pace. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
She just took a breath in.
Okay. As she's taken a breath, just like we did before, I want you to say now every single time she takes a breath in, starting immediately. First breath.
No.
Okay, pump the chest then, like I gave you those instructions at this pace. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Count out loud so I can count with
1,
you.
2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep going.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
Okay.
3.
That's your 30. Now with your hand under her neck, pinch
Yep.
her nose closed and carefully tilt her head back again.
Yep.
Give 2 more regular breaths, then pump the chest 30 more times. Make sure the heel of your hand is on the breastbone in the center of the chest, right between the nipples. Do you understand?
Yep.
So from now on, give her 2 breaths, then 30 pumps, 2 breaths, then 30 pumps. Keep doing it until help can take over. All right, tell me when they're right with her, and if anything changes, tell me immediately, okay?
God. That's right.
Okay. Have you done 2 breaths and 30 pumps?
Yep.
Telling me what you're doing? No, okay.
Breath.
Is the front door to the property open?
No, I've locked it. I have to go and
Right,
do it
don't
when
do it yet. I'll tell you when they're nearby. Keep doing what you're doing, okay? So 2 breaths and 30 pumps, okay?
The force which he used in gripping Elsie was enough to cause the fractures of the ribs. The shaking was enough to cause severe brain and eye injury. Matthew called the emergency services at 6:18 p.m. Paramedics and police who attended the scene found Elsie not breathing and in cardiac arrest. Matthew allegedly told paramedic Jonathan Aberg that Elsie had screamed out as in pain, then collapsed. Matthew never told this to Craig, the hospital staff, or the police. At hospital, Matthew told police, doctors, and his husband that he had changed Elsie on the floor in front of the TV. He then took the dirty nappy out to the kitchen, leaving Elsie on the floor, and returned to find her apparently sleeping. She didn't respond to him, and he began CPR. He seemed to be describing some kind of sudden collapse in the moments that he was out of the room and Elsie was alone. David Tuthill, a consultant pediatrician, spoke to Matthew and Craig as Elsie was being resuscitated. The doctor said that Craig was tearful and visibly upset. On the other hand, Matthew was very calm. Quote, "It was something as I came back down to intensive care that I said to my nurse practitioner, I said, that's strange. He was very calm. Most resuscitations people are in tears. Parents are normally in floods of tears. It struck me as very unusual. It was very strange and out of the ordinary," he said. "People react in different ways. The common way when your child is being resuscitated and dying in front of you is to cry. I'm a children's doctor, I'm not an adult psychiatrist, but I see a lot of parents and they are usually pretty upset." 4 days later, in the early hours of 29th of May 2016, Elsie's ventilator was turned off and she sadly passed away at the University Hospital of Wales. Elsie was aged just 18 months when she was killed, a young, defenseless baby. Elsie suffered a cardiac arrest. She sustained hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, brain injury including subdural hematoma, bleeding in the eyes, the retina, the perimacular folds, and in the area of the optic nerve. She sustained a full thickness fracture of the skull and fractures to 3 posterior ribs. The injuries were sustained when Matthew gripped Elsie around the chest. His fingers were on her back, applying pressure, which fractured her ribs. Having gripped Elsie, he then shook her with such force that it caused further injuries. The fracture to the skull was caused by an impact with a hard surface. Her collapse would have quickly followed. When that happened, Matthew called the emergency services. Following the events of 25th of May 2016, a doctor reviewed Elsie's November 2015 right leg x-rays. It was found that Elsie had suffered 2 fractures, not one near the ankle and one just above the knee. Sarah Harrison, a consultant pediatric radiologist, believed the injuries were the result of trauma. Nia John, a consultant pediatrician, said it would be unusual to suffer 2 such fractures in the same fall. A post-mortem examination found that Elsie had previous and recent bleeding on both sides of her brain. She had hemorrhages in both eyes, rib fractures, and a fracture to her skull from an impact to her head. Forensic pathologist Stephen Leadbetter found that Elsie died from hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy caused by a lack of oxygen to her brain following cardiac arrest in a child with acute subdural hemorrhage and a blunt head injury that included fracture of the right lambdoid suture. Consultant pediatrician Stephen Rose said the leg fractures were not consistent with Matthew's explanation. He said it was likely that Elsie had been shaken violently and that her head had been rocked backwards and forwards so that her head was flexed down onto her chest and then flexed backwards. This mechanism would then cause the subdural bleeding or the bleeds around the brain and the retinal hemorrhages, and also it would cause her to stop breathing. There was a cause of the fracture. Skull fractures don't just happen all of a sudden. The only mechanism for a skull fracture is if there was a blow to the head, either during the shaking injury, which culminated in Elsie being thrown against a hard floor, or possibly her head being knocked against a wall. Dr. Rose said the microfractures to the back of 3 of Elsie's ribs were caused by crushing injuries, so an adult's hand around the chest, compressing the chest forcibly. Professor Anthony Fremont, a bone and joint pathologist, also found fractures in Elsie's left leg caused shortly before her death. Elsie had, within 3 to 5 days of her ultimate death, suffered injuries to 5 different bones at 3 different sites: the skull, the left femur, and 3 ribs. Another expert, Dr. Neil Studley, found Elsie's head injuries were likely to be due to an episode of explosive head trauma that involved a shaking mechanism. Elsie could not have inflicted these injuries on herself. It still took a month for her killer to be interviewed by South Wales Police on June 27, 2016. After the authorities noticed all the suspicious injuries Elsie had suffered since she broke her leg on November the 5th, 2015. 6 months after that police interview, Matthew was arrested on suspicion of Elsie's murder. During police investigations, officers examined mobile devices belonging to Matthew. They found messages from him suggesting that he was struggling to cope with caring for the children. In one message sent 11 days after Elsie had been placed with the family, he wrote that she was having a proper diva stroke about it all, which is annoying. The following day, he wrote that she had another diva stroke at tea time. He also wrote, "I'm going through hell with Elsie. Mealtimes and bedtimes are likely my worst nightmare at the minute. She's been up there screaming for 10 minutes non-stop. She's just stopped. But I doubt that's the last I'll hear tonight." In another message, he described Elsie as a psycho. When asked by a friend how his day had been, he replied, yo, well, on the whole it was okay, minus lunch and tea time when she turned into Satan. Then again, at bedtime she screamed in her cot for 10 minutes. When giving evidence at trial, Matthew said that calling Elsie Satan was just text talk and taken out of context with other messages in the conversation. Quote, "I would not refer to her in that way other than in a text message," he said. "It is text talk. We would have been making light of a situation. Again, this week, we weren't very well." Matthew claimed he had been looking after Elsie alone when he saw her fall while standing at the activity table in the kitchen. He claimed at various times that she may have fallen from standing or while pushing a walker, twisting her legs in the process. He would say that perhaps his daughter had been suffering from vitamin D deficiency or rickets, which could have made her more likely to suffer fractures. Rickets is the softening and weakening of bones in children, usually because of an extreme and prolonged vitamin D deficiency. A medical expert would tell the jury that he had never seen fractures of both bones like the one suffered by Elsie in a child of her age, adding, "I have seen them in adults in more major traumas such as car accidents or falls from height." Throughout his trial, Matthew maintained his innocence. He said he's not to blame for it, he didn't cause those injuries, he did nothing to Elsie on the 5th of November, and he did nothing to Elsie ever. Matthew was assessed by 2 independent psychiatrists who found no psychiatric condition which would have affected his actions. The jury of 9 men and 3 women took 3 days to decide otherwise in the case of the tragic murder of his adopted daughter. It found unanimously that Matthew Scully-Hicks murdered Elsie Scully-Hicks 2 weeks after officially adopting her. In November 2017, almost 2 years to the day after he is first believed to have attacked Elsie, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years.
She was just 18 months old when she died, and the final months of the life of Elsie Scully-Hicks were brutal. Elsie died at the hands of the man who had just adopted her. 31-year-old Matthew Scully-Hicks denied everything in court, but this was his 999 call from May last year.
Tell me exactly what happened.
I was just changing my daughter for bed, and then she went all floppy and limp, and now she's not doing anything. She's lying on the floor.
Okay, you with her now, sir?
I am.
How old's your daughter?
She's 18 months.
Okay, is she awake?
No.
Is she breathing?
No.
The jury in Cardiff was told Scully-Hicks had shaken Elsie, breaking her ribs and then striking her head. He blamed doctors for failing to treat Elsie properly after an earlier incident. Scully-Hicks claimed she'd fallen through a stairgate. It was just another lie.
Elsie.
And what caused the fall?
I didn't push the gate closed properly and she fell down.
Okay, is there any serious bleeding?
Not that I can see.
Okay, and you're saying she's not fully alert?
No.
Okay, what part of the body's injured?
I don't know. She's just lying there. She's just all floppy.
In text messages, Scully-Hicks have referred to Elsie as Satan dressed up in a baby grow, and prosecutors say that neighbours had heard shouting.
This was, of course, a tragic case, and our thoughts and sympathies are with Elsie's loved ones. The evidence put forward by the CPS proved that Matthew Scully-Hicks was not only responsible for her injuries, but that he intended to seriously harm her.
It was only 2 weeks before her death that Scully-Hicks and his husband had formally adopted the little girl. Given the medical history of Elsie's short, brutal life, that process is now in the spotlight.
Matthew's actions in killing Elsie devastated 3 families. The family Matthew tried to build with Craig, his husband, the birth family of Elsie, Shayla as they knew her, and Matthew's own birth family. The husband of Matthew Scully-Hicks, Craig, ended their relationship after medical evidence proved the monster killed their daughter. Craig Scully-Hicks, 36 years old, told the family court he had been left lonely and frightened since Elsie's death at the couple's home in Cardiff. During family court proceedings relating to Elsie's elder sibling, known only as C, Craig said he was devastated. He didn't want to be alone in the house where the murder took place. He is lonely and frightened. Craig confronted his husband after receiving a medical report about Elsie's injuries. Matthew continued to deny that he did anything, but the report said something else. Craig didn't even know what to think. They had endless heated arguments. Craig did recognize that Matthew hurt Elsie and she died as a result of it. That's why he ended their relationship. He even removed his wedding ring. During the family court proceedings, Craig Scully-Hicks told the judge he will continue to beat himself up about being more concerned about Elsie's health rather than how her injuries were caused. The children idolized Matthew, and Craig idolized Matthew. He didn't know the monster Matthew turned into. In December 2016, Craig Scully-Hicks informed the family court that he accepted his husband had killed Elsie, as well as causing her a twice broken leg in November 2015. Craig did wonder why Elsie was having so many accidents when she was not having them, but the professionals accepted the explanations that Matthew had given. Craig heard his husband raise his voice to tell his children off, but he never witnessed him swearing at them. In January 2016, he noticed a few marks to Elsie's ears. However, there was no behavior at home that would have alerted Craig that something wasn't right. On the surface, Matthew and Elsie were bonding. She showed no fear of him. She was happy to go to him. The judge exonerated Craig of any failure to protect Elsie. The judge said there was nothing he could or should have done. Craig Scully-Hicks moved in with a friend after separating on 17th of November, what would have been Elsie's second birthday. Elsie's maternal grandmother, Shan O'Brien, said, quote, "A person who had been deemed by the authorities to be a fit and proper person to bring up my granddaughter was responsible for her death, and they took her from me, telling me I would be unable to cope." End of quote. Elsie's birth family said she would still be alive today if she had not been removed from their care by social services. All of Elsie's birth family were extremely attached to her and loved her very much. Following the death of Elsie, a child practice review undertaken by Cardiff and Vale Regional Child Safeguarding Board found that professionals saw Elsie's injuries in isolation, lacked professional curiosity, and accepted the explanations given by Matthew. The report said that Matthew Scully-Hicks and his partner presented as a well-educated and articulate couple and very positive parents for this child. As a result, there was a lack of professional curiosity regarding the child's experiences and injuries. The professionals involved in the case viewed the adoptive placement as being very successful, and it criticized the recording of incidents and communication between agencies, claiming no one agency held all the relevant information on this child. Each time, Elsie's injuries were written off as common accidents or illnesses after her articulate attacker made up excuses. The review found that professionals working with Elsie failed to consider her injuries together or what that meant for her home life. The review identified two key injuries that agencies involved with her care failed to identify: the fracture to her upper leg and the large bruise to her forehead. I don't know how they failed to identify that large bruise when the bruise was there for 8 weeks, and in that whole time it was the adoption review, and the home was visited by everyone, by social workers, health professionals, the adoption social workers, Elsie social workers, all these kind of professionals. They were going in and out, and all this time they were seeing Elsie and they were seeing her large bruise on her forehead. The report concluded that because the bruise went unrecorded, the injury was effectively invisible to professionals and did not form part of building an overall picture of what was happening to the child. Lance Carver, Director of Social Services at the Vale of Glamorgan Council, accepted the findings of the report and apologized for errors in Elsie's case. He said no disciplinary action had been taken against any member of staff, as the report did not indicate that it would be appropriate. Two top social services executives in the Welsh county in which Elsie was killed retired in the months after Elsie's tragic death. The team in Vale of Glamorgan missed several chances to save Elsie from her abusive adoptive father, Matthew Scully-Hicks. Hilary Southam, care leader at the Vale of Glamorgan Social Services, retired just 3 months after Elsie was murdered in May 2016. When approached about Matthew's trial outside her Barry, South Wales home, she said, quote, "I'm retired, I don't want to talk about it," end of quote. Her former colleague, director of social services, Phil Evans, retired just before Matthew's murder trial began at Cardiff Crown Court. His wife told reporters at the time, quote, "He is no longer at the Vale of Glamorgan Council, so it's not really his issue." End of quote. Disgusting people, disgusting individuals, horrendous. I don't have words because this enrages me so much, and those comments and those people's comments, which just goes to show that they don't care at all about a child, about a baby losing their life because of them, because it was their fault. They seem like the kind of people who don't even give a second thought to whatever happened after they left that bloody office job, and once they got home, that's it, they were completely disconnected. To them, children are not human beings. To them, children are just another figure on a bloody piece of paper. Oh my God, it enrages me so badly. All these things enrage me so much. The death of a child is a tragedy. The murder of a child is an outrage. The very short life and violent murder of Elsie Scully-Hicks, known and loved by some as Shayla O'Brien, should give everyone pause for thought, because some things are hidden in plain sight. Matthew wrote an open letter while behind bars, begging for help to clear his name. The guts on this man. The guts on this man. Can you just believe it? He wrote, quote, "I need help now to prove my innocence, as I can't do that from prison. And that is where I'm hoping I can rely on the people that knew me and knew Elsie. The people that, like me, know this doesn't make sense. And the people who can provide insight or evidence that can help me and other families that have been through a similarly awful experience. I have now missed the opportunity to say goodbye to my daughter at her funeral that was held last week, and I don't want to miss any more of my family for any longer than I have to. There is nothing that can bring Elsie back, but we can change the version of what happened. Elsie wasn't a victim. She was my much-loved little princess who I miss with all my heart." No, Matthew, no, you can't change the version of what happened. You killed your daughter. Nothing will ever change that. There is absolutely no other version in this story that will change the fact that you, Matthew, killed your daughter, Elsie. I can't believe that he even has the nerve to ask for help. It's just completely disgusting. After the case, it was revealed that a family division court judge described Matthew as a Jekyll and Hyde character. Despite the conviction, a group of Matthew's friends from his hometown of Delabole, Cornwall, were trying to raise funds to secure his freedom. The Scully-Hicks Innocence Project, they even gave that a name, SHI Project, says they are dedicated to the release of Matthew. Former school friend Hannah Scarr said, quote, "Matthew Scully-Hicks was wrongly convicted on November the 6th, 2017 of murdering his daughter Elsie. The project is founded by local friends and acquaintances of Matthew's family who equally feel affected by the injustice that he and his family have been dealt. We feel that there is a great amount of detail of the case and trial that has been misreported, left out completely, or misconstrued to portray a monster. In reality, everyone who has ever met Matthew have only lovely things to say about him. Matthew and his family now have a long road ahead of them to prove his innocence against the media circus surrounding his trial. He did not stand a chance when he was considered guilty by the media on the very first day of the trial. This is why we are passionate about this cause. His family have to find both the money and the strength to go through the lengthy process of an appeal. Matthew has lost his whole family, his daughter, his son, his marriage, his home, and now his life. In short, Elsie suffered from a serious vitamin D deficiency diagnosed by Professor Hollick of Boston University, a very well-renowned specialist in vitamin D. It is well documented that children deficient in vitamin D suffer from bone fractures, dental deformities, impaired growth, and even cardiac arrest. Elsie was also born drug dependent, as her birth mother used among other drugs whilst pregnant. Elsie was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a larger gap between the outside surface of the brain and inside surface of the skull. All this combined meant that what would be a usual knock or fall for a toddler was catastrophic for Elsie. Matthew was convicted of shaken baby syndrome, a controversial subject within the justice system. There is little evidence to suggest that shaken baby syndrome can be scientifically proven, and many parents have been falsely convicted of this syndrome only to be exonerated years later. End of quote. Seriously, this I don't know, rings a bell to me. This sounds to me very similar to the Amber Heard story, where she said that because of the media portrayed her as a monster, and that's why the jury found in favor of Johnny Depp. In this case, the media judged him and turned this into bad publicity for him, and that's why he was wrongfully convicted by the jury, because of the media portraying him as a monster. No, dear friends of Matthew, and I think you people are just disgusting. I think you are completely disgusting. If you still support him, I think you are just completely disgusting. I don't think that the media or anything what happened outside of the trial or outside of the court had anything to do with the jury finding Matthew guilty, because the jury is not allowed to consider anything outside of the evidence that is presented to them. And this is just ridiculous, honestly. But anyway, as far as I know, and I hope it's true, I don't think the fundraiser is active anymore. Plus, what they raised was around £40, and they were looking to raise at least £10,000. Can you just believe it? The thing is that this American doctor actually testified at the trial via video, and he did say that he believed Elsie died as a result of vitamin D deficiency, and the injuries were consistent with that. However, a team of more than 3 medical professionals from the UK during the trial said that's just not true. Elsie did have low levels of vitamin D, but according to UK standards, that didn't qualify for vitamin D deficiency, and there was in no way possible that she died as a result of vitamin D deficiency. Matthew also tried to go down the route of some kind of genetic condition that Elsie might have had, but it turned out she had none of that. I just can't believe that people still believe him. He killed his own daughter because he couldn't cope, and the worst thing is that Elsie could still be alive today if social services would have given her to her maternal grandmother, who they decided she wouldn't be able to cope. Yet Matthew was the one unable to cope with 2 children. These social services are just ridiculous, beyond ridiculous, and everything in between in so many circumstances. And I personally feel this. I really do personally feel this. I feel it. And I'm going to calm down now. And I just want to thank you for staying with me throughout this entire video, and for staying with me and hearing me rambling and hearing me getting my blood pressure up. For now, this is all I have for today's video. Please do let me know what do you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you really think that Matthew was innocent and he was wrongfully convicted? Or do you think that in reality Matthew was unable to cope with 2 children and he killed Elsie in a fit of rage? Please, I'm really curious to hear your opinions. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. For now, thank you so much for watching. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video where officially the Halloween season begins.